Greetings. Welcome to the sixth lecture in Sealaska Heritage Institute's series celebrating Native American Heritage Month. I am Chuck Smythe, Director of the History and Culture Department. SHI has started construction of its arts campus in downtown Juneau, which will expand opportunities for education and art. If you are interested in making a donation to the arts campus or submitting a letter of support to the Juneau Assembly for city funding, please visit sealaskaheritage.org/campus. The title of today's lecture is The Great Vanishing Act, Blood Quantum and the Future of Native Nations. As you watch the lecture, we invite you to submit questions in the chat box in YouTube. Dr. Hill has graciously agreed to answer questions at the end of his presentation. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Hill. Norbert S. Hill, Jr. is of the Oneidas Nation of Wisconsin and has developed and administered education programs for American Indian students for nearly 50 years. Dr. Hill was the executive director of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society and the American Indian Graduate Center. He later served as the director of education programs for the Oneidas Nation of Wisconsin. He edited Words of Power, Voices for Indian America, and holds 2 honorary doctorates from Clarkson University and Cumberland College, along with a BS and an MA from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. Past board appointments include the Environmental Defense Fund Chair, board member of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, and trustee at St. Norbert College and the Wisconsin Historical Society. In 2017, he co-authored an anthology, The Great Vanishing Act, Blood Quantum and the Future of Native Nations. Dr. Hill lives in Oneida, Wisconsin with his wife. Dr. Hill.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, here we go. Thank you for that kind introduction. It always sounds better when somebody else says it, so I appreciate it. I've been invited to give a presentation about blood quantum. This stems from the anthology that I co-authored 2 years ago, The Great Vanishing Act, Blood Quantum and the Future of Native Nations. 6 weeks after its release, it went into its second printing. If anyone is interested in the book, you can order it through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and you'll be able to get a copy. I will frame my comments today with the book in mind, as well as conversations that I've had with Indians around the country and with my own community, the Oneida community in Wisconsin. If you put on the book slide, thank you. The anthology was intended as a teaching tool to help communities, Indian people, and students to understand the impact and the challenges before us. When the time comes, hopefully Indian nations will be better prepared to make informed decisions. This is not an academic book. It was intended to be a reader. We try to get it down to the 5th grade level, and some chapters are more complicated than others, but our goal was understanding and community education. And what we learned is community education takes a long time. It takes a considerable amount of time, and you need to plan for that. I hope that I can leave you with 3 things to remember. Blood quantum is not sustainable over time. We have a choice and an opportunity to redefine ourselves. You can't run from who you are or where you came from. In 1972, I was fresh out of college, and I interviewed for a position at a university in Wisconsin. It was a group interview with faculty members, and it was in the early 1970s, and the attrition rate for Indian college students was 90% or higher. Kids were smart, but they simply weren't ready. The question that was posed to me, a faculty member said to me, "Why are you an Indian?" And I was sort of stunned. Nobody ever asked me that question. And I came back, replied saying, well, it came with the body. Why? Really, what I wanted to say is, why are you a white man? I didn't know it at the time, 50 years ago, that it was the seed for the anthology of the Great Vanishing Act. But it may be the most important issue facing Indian country this century. You can take the book slide off. Indian kids on our reservation think I'm a pirate. And I say to them, a pirate is only an occupation. Being an Indian is an identity. You can be an Indian, you can be a teacher, a doctor, or an engineer at the same time. We should not let our occupation become our identity. Why are you an Indian? Not a great interview question, but a good question, an intimate question, a question that we should ask ourselves. Discuss it with your family and close friends. You can't run from who you are or where you came from. Identity is a process, not an event. It's a lifelong process. The lessons are embedded in your cultural values. I feel sorry for the poor guy in Oklahoma who's 1/8 of 8 different tribes, a full blood but not enrolled. Who belongs and who decides? What about your children? What about your grandchildren? The problem is not only about the next generation, about the next 100 or 200 years. Nobody's going to save us but us. Let me say a word about civics. All of us have had a civics course at our schooling. In 1959, I was the flag boy for my grade school. I learned how to fold a flag properly. I could say the Pledge of Allegiance. I could sing the national anthem. I learned about the 3 branches of government. I learned about the Constitution. I think I had to memorize the preamble. And the recent election earlier this month has reminded us about voting, the Electoral College, and the House and the Senate. But I didn't learn about being an Oneida in school. My grandmother, who was a Mohawk orphan, was born in 1876. She graduated from medical school in 1899. But she said the following: going to school and getting an education are 2 different things, and they don't always happen at the same time. My first classroom was at the kitchen table. And for many of you, probably the kitchen table was your first classroom. I learned about history, family, relatives, tribal government, how decisions were made, clans, ceremonies, language, songs, and relationships to each other. We have a responsibility to learn both. Are we members of a club or citizens of a nation? A club provides money, gifts, points, and prizes. And if you're a citizen of a nation, you have responsibility. And what is that responsibility? In my view, if an Indian student accepts Indian money to go to college, you have the responsibility to the community. You can't unring the bell. Saying that you're an Indian and being an Indian are 2 different things. Yesterday, Alan Parker talked about the definitions between membership and citizenship. And I think we need to be very clear about this. They are very different. And I think there should be some serious discussion about those 2 things, membership and citizenship. I want to share a quote with you by Senator Anthony Higgins. I have to get my glasses on here. Hang on a second here. Senator Anthony Higgins, and blood quantum was not a new idea in 1895. Senator from Delaware. It seems to me one of the ways of getting rid of the Indian question, justice, is through intermarriage and a gradual fading out of Indian blood. The whole quality and character of the Aborigine disappears. They lose all of the traditions of the race. There is no longer any occasion to maintain tribal relations. And there was every reason why they should go and take their place as white people everywhere. So an idea of erasing us is not a new one. And so I think President Biden should remember his predecessor in the state of Delaware, and also noting that Indians in New Mexico and Arizona, particularly Arizona, were the tipping point for his election as president-elect. Wisconsin was a tipping point. There are other states that also have that. So I think, I hope the president doesn't get amnesia about the role of Indians in the last election. In 1934, Congress passed the Indian Reorganization Act, known as the IRA. Alan Parker discussed this yesterday. Some call it the New Deal for Indians, others call it the Raw Deal. We were in the Great Depression. It provided a way for tribes to regain some land that was lost, provided government resources, benefits, a provision for self-rule, and protected Indian religion. It was self-government, but under government supervision, under the thumb of the BIA and Department of Interior. It was paternalism at best, and promoted dissemination, a loss of cultural and identity. Also, government lawyers drafted a model tribal constitution that included the blood quantum provision that many tribes adopted. Traditional Oneida decision-making was consensus, not Robert's Rules of Order, which consensus is getting everybody to agree. Robert's Rules of Order is 50% plus one. This is 1934. I don't know how it affected the tribes and the native communities in Alaska, but Alaska didn't become a state till 1959. In 1972, when I was able to find the Marine Mammals Act, and blood quantum was linked to the 14 villages in Southeast Alaska. In 2021, 30% of the natives in Southeast Alaska, was, as far as I could tell, were 1/4. Now we're 20 years later, another generation. I don't know your data or now the complexity of your corporate structure, intermarriage, and tribal government decisions, and citizenship requirements, and how you include people into your nation. I do know that you'll have to grapple with these issues in the future. In 1936, the Oneidas of Wisconsin adopted an IRA constitution. Here's a snapshot of my tribe today, the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, with 17,000 plus members, or I should say citizens. 46% are quarter bloods, another 14% are half or less. Indians marry out at a higher rate than any other ethnic group. The mortality rate is higher than our birth rate. Baby boomers are dying, and fewer children are being born. The mortality is further aided by the pandemic. Families of 10 or 12 no longer exist. We have smaller families, and it's simple about economics. In 1936, the Oneidas chiefs married the girl next door. And somebody might have said, this is going to be a problem, but it's not going to be our problem. So here we are, 3 generations later. Men went to war, many didn't come back. Indian children went to boarding schools. Indian boys got cars. Oneidas married other Indians and non-Indians. We have, as a result of Haskell babies. Maybe there's some Mount Edgecomb babies in Alaska. I don't know. Here's the grandma's dilemma. This is the classic argument between the head and the heart. In the head, it says, blood quantum is not sustainable over time. We know that. The numbers just don't bear us out. The heart says, I want my grandchildren and children and great-grandchildren to participate in all the rights and responsibilities of our nation. There's no silver bullet in this dilemma. I wish there was, but we need to think about it. A thoughtful and civil conversation is required. This is not about speed dating. It takes time to hear all the voices, from the youngest to the oldest, and everyone in between. Also knowing that time is our greatest enemy, and it sits on our shoulder. The legendary basketball coach John Wooden at UCLA said, "Be quick, but don't hurry." A lesson that I have to keep in mind. If you put up the Marty Tubal's graph cartoon, simple arithmetic and statistics are not enough. I wanted this to be the cover of the book, and I lost that battle. It's on the back cover, but when I saw that image first, I said, "There's a book behind that image," and so the publisher said the political cartoons don't sell books, but I said, you don't have to be a math major to figure out what's going on here. So what we need to do is apply the calculus of populations on our groups. A demographer has helped us to crunch some of our numbers and to look at us in terms of moving forward in the years ahead. We're trying to see around the corner, not only 20 years, but 200 years. I think a solution, or part of a solution, might be tribal incentives for Native researchers would be most helpful. If you could take the folks that are upperclassmen or graduate students and have a competition or a paper of research in Southeast Alaska, and you might get a demographer or two out of this, but it would help. It would help the tribe, its growth and development. They could get credit for a paper or whatever they wrote, and they could kill two birds with one stone. But it's having students contribute to the well-being and the growth of the tribe. And you could offer prizes, so there could be incentives of connecting the two. Indigenous populations in the Americas and the world are at risk. Indigenous languages and culture are on the brink. We live in the past, the present, and the future at the same time. William Faulkner said, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." You can take the slide off, it's okay. To gain perspective, we need to move forward and look back at the same time. Olympic athletes say, "We wear the gold inside before we win the medal." Mohawk Shirley Hill Witt says, "I wear the great law inside of me." No doubt that Shirley Hill Witt knows who she is. I wear the great law inside of me. You must have an equivalent metaphor in your culture. Identity is the value proposition. I've worked with young people over the years, mostly college students, and elders would say, when you get your diploma, what does your heart know? Every Indian nation and Native nation knows and has the authority to determine who is a citizen. Deciding citizenship is an act of sovereignty. Alan Parker said yesterday, and reminded us, we don't need the BIA or the Department of Interior for approval. You decide who is a citizen of your particular group. You have to include the voices of the youngest to the oldest to be heard and to be understood. You have a role in participating in your perspective and ability to decide about who are your citizens in the future. A frequent question by a lot of tribes and groups is saying, what are other groups thinking about? So one is, if we have a blood quantum of a quarter, we'll think about just moving it to an eighth. Well, the problem with that is that in 20 years from now, you're going to have the same conversation, and you'll be talking about going to 1/16. And so that really doesn't solve the problem. You're just passing the buck to the next generation. And so how long before you get washed out? John Mohawk, who was a Seneca who now passed away, and he wrote a book called Thinking Indian. But anyway, he suggested that making every enrolled member a citizen of your tribe full blood, and then you'll have a couple generations to decide. Some want to keep the 1/4 quarter blood period, but not making a decision is a decision. I mean, so over time, no matter how you cut blood quantum, it's not sustainable over time. Some tribes look at lineal descent. The Cherokees are one example, but there are other tribes who are doing lineal descent. That means if somebody was on your base roll and you can prove that you're a direct descendant of that particular person, you become a member of that group. You know, the possibility is that you might lose local control, especially with absentee voting. I had a mother call and argue with me about a scholarship one time. And she said, I want you to know my son is 13th 256 degree Cherokee. And my response was, if he cuts himself shaving, how much blood is left? Well, that wasn't an appropriate response, but her son was a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and I had to consider him. So I don't know how much he knew about being a Cherokee, but some say there are more Cherokees in Southern California than there are in Tahlequah. So I'm a proponent of home rule. So we got to figure out how to maintain home rule on our tribes. Pueblos of the Southwest, we had a workshop. Well, first, the Pueblos are a theocracy. It's a blend of Indian culture and religion, particularly the Catholic religion. One of the greatest stories is the Indian Revolt of 1580, where they got rid of the priests. But we had a workshop at Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico with about 400 participants. The identity of belonging are lifelong lessons of the Kiva. The conversation started in English and drifted into their own Keres language. Hearing and listening from the heart. I didn't know what they were saying, but I knew it was good. Some other tribes talk about combining all Indian blood. So if you're part Lakota, part Cherokee, and part Menominee, you kind of blend them all together into one tribe, into one Indian. And, I guess we could call them Haskell babies. The Oneidas in New York, some of you might know Oren Lyons, but they've readopted or maintained the traditional Haudenosaunee Longhouse ways, matrilineal society. So if the man marries out, you got one generation to marry back in. If not, you're out. And so they've gone the very conservative traditional route, which is not a bad idea. So every tribe has its own way of deciding what's right for them. So there's no, again, like I say, no silver bullet to do this. But I just want to say one thing. We don't want to confuse blood quantum with disenrollment. Disenrollment is a dangerous combination of gaming, money, and politics that's happening now, particularly in California, but in other places. NCAI this week took the action to create a task force regarding a Citizenship Act. And I do hope Alan Parker is selected to participate on the task force, but I think that's an important milestone this year for NCAI. The pandemic has stopped meaningful conversations. We've lost momentum and meaningful dialogue in our tribe. Understandably, families and leaders are focused on the well-being and safety of their families and community. At the same time of uncertainty, our natural inclination is to protect what is most immediate to us. Again, time is our greatest enemy. The clock continues to tick, with mortality rates being higher than newborns. Let me close with what really matters. Sovereignty, the ability to govern ourselves. We are many nations, not nonprofit organizations. Tribes issue license plates, passports, which are expressions of sovereignty and nationhood. Institutions, schools, health centers, the judiciary, tribal judges, law enforcement, banks, and bingo halls are part of the institutions that are under the umbrella of our sovereign nation. Culture matters. Language, values, songs, ceremonies, dances, clans, creation stories are about who we are and values. Leadership matters. You choose and elect leaders. We share in the leadership with all our citizens, from the oldest to the youngest, reclaiming our voice for ourselves. Again, I would like you to remember three things. Blood quantum is not sustainable over time. We have an opportunity of choice to redefine ourselves, and you can't run from who you are or where you came from. So I hope this gives you a little bit of insight in terms of the blood quantum challenge that we have in front of us. And again, it's an important issue for all of us, and it's about our survival moving forward. I don't know, Chuck, if you have some questions that people have posed. I'm glad to try to respond to them.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. That's a lot of perspective on this topic. We have one comment that says, thank you for saying that when you accept tribal money, such as scholarships, you have a responsibility to the tribe. We don't hear that often, but that definitely was the teaching of the elders.
Well, again, you can't run from who you are, where you came from. And I think we ought to require, not by guilt, but by responsibility, that if we lose this generation of young people, we're in a lot of trouble. And so I think we got to loop back the education of what they're learning and apply it to the tribe.
I was intrigued with I have another comment. I was intrigued with your discussion of the various options, such as eliminating blood quantum or considering individuals who have a degree of blood quantum in multiple tribes and adding those up. Has that been tried anywhere?
Not that I know of, but there's been some talk about that. But also, you're joining an amalgamation of Indians of different tribes, so you got to decide which one you want to belong to. You can only belong to one tribe, so you know some people try to shop tribes and to see what benefits they can get, and that's pretty much. We make sure that when people want to join our tribe, they don't belong to another one, but you can't participate in more than one. Another group I forgot about is the Potawatomis, and they're all over the country. They've been separated and divided many times, and they have a citizenship requirement by region. And so you might want to Google the Potawatomis and see what they're thinking in terms of how they want to define their citizenship moving forward. Is that Rosita?
Oh, hi, Norbert. How are you?
Thank you for doing this. I appreciate having the opportunity to share a few words.
Great. I actually tried to write you a question, but somehow or another on my computer, the chat box wasn't working. Okay. So I just thought I would take advantage of the opportunity and come over here and say hi to you, and then maybe, and then pose you the question. I was interested in your concept. You know, you talked about home rule. And there is a difference between those living at home on tribal lands and those who may live away in the urban center. And the concern has been that if we have a greater number living outside and away from home, that they could actually control, you know, what happens at home. For example, you at home, there may be some sort of development that people at home might not want, but those living off the reservations might support for economic reasons. And so I was interested in your concept of home rule. Is there a suggestion that maybe it could be like corporations where you have different classes of stock, and some stock have voting rights and some stock don't have voting rights? So let's say Class A citizen would have voting rights for tribal matters, and Class B would not have voting rights, but maybe be entitled to economic benefits. Is that what I'm
Yeah,
hearing you talk about, home rule?
yeah, I think so. I think I'm a proponent of protecting the homeland first, you know. And so I don't want, and I live in Wisconsin, I don't want people in Chicago or Louisiana uh, being the tipping point of how our tribe is governed. And so I think that's a careful discussion that one needs to have. One of the things that we've run into is saying, well, maybe we should just give benefits to natives living on the reservation and not so much for people living off the reservation. Well, then you create a couple classes of people. Yes. And if you want to start a revolution, that'd be a perfect way to do it, you know. So I think we want to stay away from that, but we want to figure out how do we survive in our own homeland, and what land makes the difference, you know. And if we don't have land, we don't have a tribe, we don't have a nation. And so I think that's got to be part of the careful considerations of each nation to decide on how they decide. You know, people who moved away, they will argue that there were no jobs on the reservation and we had to move away for our own family survival. And of course, they got relatives that are back and forth, and they move back and forth, and you know. And I think Alan Parker talked a little bit about is that how much do people participate in the community, and how are community values held, you know? So again, I think it's just food for thought and something that we need to consider. We can't afford not to talk about it.
Exactly. I understand that there are some tribes that have added in that cultural determination as an eligibility for citizenship, and that might be another dimension.
Well, I know in one case in point, and it used to be for the Navajos, they had a language requirement to receive a scholarship. But what kids did, learned enough Navajo to get the scholarship, and they forgot it. So they didn't use the language, you know. So I don't know if there's a litmus test of saying, you know, could I pass the test of the 14 villages in Southeast Alaska, and would that make me be an Indian? So it goes back to saying you're an Indian and being an Indian are two different things. And I think the values have a lot to do with it in terms of how they're practices and how they apply to the community. We want community development first, and then we can take care of the others who live in different places. You know, sending our kids away to school is not about, it shouldn't be about a brain drain. We should be figuring out how to loop those kids back into the nation in ways that will be productive in our tribal growth. But if we lose our best minds, we're in a lot of trouble.
And maybe the concept that I think it's Indian Health, or when they give scholarships, then they expect the graduates to do some work, you know, for Indian Health. That's right. Maybe that might be, you know, a resolution or an aspect.
It might be a model to look at, but I also, you know, pose that you might want to try to find some incentives for Native researchers, people who will do research on your own land while they're studying. You know, they could, you know, we need demographers, but we also need community researchers that would help you decide some sociological problems or some environmental problems that they could kill two birds with one stone. They could get credit towards their degree, but they can also compute it to the community. That way they don't have amnesia when they get their diploma. You know, they know who they are and where they belong.
Well, I don't want to dominate the discussion, but I see that we have a couple of questions that came up, or at least comments. And if I could go ahead, I'll do that. And then And then if we don't have any further questions, I'd like to continue the discussion. So
Okay, thank you.
here,
Good to see you.
we have a comment. A lot of us who are adopted out aren't officially members of a tribe or First Nation, but somehow have deep values about being Indigenous. And then the person continues, and I don't know any of us who've gone to elders that have been told we aren't Indians. They've validated us spiritually.
Well, the adoption records used to be closed, and more now there seem to be opening them up. The people who adopted those people have a responsibility to expose those kids to who they are and where they came from. Many times they're not. A lot of that happened to Navajo kids in Utah when they were adopted to Mormon families. They're brown kids, but they don't look like they fit in. But I'm sure there's other examples where kids were adopted for good reasons or maybe not so good reasons. But I think that should be, I think it requires understanding on both sides. One of the adopted parents, but also the tribe is saying, these kids were temporarily lost, and there's got to be a way to put your arms around them and incorporate them in some way. Again, it's about living and incorporating tribal values rather than mainstream values on these kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, it kind of reminds me of what happened in my family. Actually, my mother, we have strict, at the time we had strict rules, exogamous marriages, and she didn't comply with that. And so she was actually ostracized by her own parents. Yeah. But I think it continued to happen where we were having what we call double eagle, double raven marriages. And so upon the death of my grandfather, he called me back because I was the product of that violation of the rule. And they actually had a ceremony where even though I hadn't been removed from my culture, but I had been removed from at least my grandfather's, some of our cultural, the cultural norms were broken. And so they actually had a ceremony for me where they, I was likened to the bird that, the little chick that fell out of the tree. And so in that ceremony that they had up in Haines, I was brought back into the nest. And so maybe we might think culturally about, some of our kids who have been removed, and we know a lot of them were removed, through the boarding schools and through these kind of adoptions. And actually, I might report that during ANCSA, when we were working on the enrollment, in one part of the country, they found several hundred Alaska Natives that had been removed by a church, because that church had said that single parents are, it wasn't right. And so they were adopted out. And so we have to think about, how do we include those kind of children?
Well, your comment is an excellent one in that, of course, intermarriage really has made it a little more complex, and sometimes we shame our own people, and whereas that there should be a process, a ceremony, some way to bring people back should they want to do that. And I don't think we can lose anybody, but I think there's got to be able to be reclamation through ceremonies, through rituals, through other ways of making people saying, welcome home. I think that's a great comment there, Rosita.
Yeah. Well, we have a Council of Traditional Scholars at Sealaska Heritage Institute, and this might be something that we might bring to them.
That's right, exactly. It's a great role for them to play,
I heard you make a comment about ANCSA corporations, and we were required to have the 1/4 blood quantum that was in the law, and we actually went to Congress after it was in the mid 80s when our elders began to say, well, this isn't right, that our children have a right to the lands because they are members of our tribe. and they have it in and of themselves. You know, it wasn't something they inherited, but they have a right to the land because they are Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian, Eskimo, or, you know, Inupiat,
Sure.
whatever. So we went back to Congress and we changed the law so that we could enroll descendants. But and people had the option of you know, using the blood quantum or lineal descendancy. But what happened was that, at least in our case in Southeast Alaska, you know, we did we hired, I can't remember that name, you know, he's Native American, he's a demographer from Southern California.
Russell
Russell
Thornton?
Yeah, we hired him.
Yeah.
So he did a demographic study, and he definitely saw that we had, you know, we had diminishing Native blood among our members. And so we looked at those projections, and then we did focus groups. And you know, there was a general sense, yes, our children, you know, need to be enrolled into the corporation to have, you know, to have their rights to the land. And but there was also, you could also hear people talking about they didn't want to have any diminishment of their, I forgot the term that they used. They were concerned about diminishing dividends.
Oh, yeah.
And so you know, we had to make a decision. Do we go with the 1/4 or do we go with something else? But the thought was that if we went with lineal descendants, or if we went with 1/8, then we wouldn't be able to pass that resolution. Because it had to pass by a super majority. And so we made a decision to use the 1/4 blood quantum, even though we knew, as you pointed out, that we're just kicking the ball down for the further generations. But our thinking was that those children that we were enrolling, more than likely, we're going to have children who are less than the 1/4, and that we would have a growing, and so we allowed enrollment in perpetuity. So the thinking was that in time we would have enough shareholders who are at the 1/4 blood quantum, who would have children who are less than the 1/4, that they would come back and demand another vote to, and hopefully at that point in time, change it to lineal descendants. And we felt like we only had that one opportunity to open the door. And I've been giving lectures, and based on our studies at SHI, that definitely shows that we have that diminishing native blood quantum. So I am hopeful that, you know, that this younger generation is going to be bringing it back for a vote and vote on that lineal descendancy.
Well, they have to really understand the complexity of the situation. And I don't know what your population is. Your population growing on the reservation or diminishing?
Yeah, definitely. And we're almost at that 50% mark now, where 50% are living outside of our region.
Outside of your region. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, and I didn't know how corporations don't decide who becomes a member of the tribe. The tribal government decides that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we do continue to have our tribal governments here. And fortunately, in our region, our tribal government has gone for the lineal descendancy. So that's not an issue there. But at the Native Corporation, you know, we are still at that 1/4 blood quantum, but we have the option. We have the option to change that through a vote of the shareholders. So that I'm thinking it's going to be a looming question, you know, as the years go by.
Yeah, well, you got shareholders, and then you got inheritance, and how that all works in terms of how people pass on their shares once they pass away.
Right, but we also have the rule too, and this is where I think that the home rule government works, is that if you're non-native, if you should inherit shares, you don't have voting rights.
Okay, all right, yeah. So your situation is a little more complex than what we deal with here, but there's not a one size that fits all. You know, And what works for the Potawatomis or works for Oran Lions and Onondaga, or what works for any other nation, it's up to them. You know, they got a right of self-rule and self-determination and their own sovereignty. So I think we got to give space for people to have the conversation, but to have a civil conversation. You know, so this gets to be very emotional, especially when there's benefits on the table.
Right.
You know, and the benefits have been a curse to a certain extent. You know,
Right.
but,
Yeah, as we've seen with the gaming tribes and those tribes
absolutely.
that have disenrolled tribal members because of that.
Yeah, well, again, the disenrollment and blood quantum are two separate issues. You know, they're related, but they're separate. You know, and so we shouldn't conflate those two terms. You know, and Alan talked about that yesterday.
Mhm. I'm thinking that we need to have, further discussions and bring in, people like yourself, Alan, and others, and I had wanted us to actually have a panel discussion, but our current situation with the virus just didn't
Right.
allow that. But
Yeah.
we're hopeful that in the future, that we're going to be able to do that, is to bring, and to bring, people who have the expertise, who've been studying this, and also, the studies that we've been doing at Sealaska Heritage, that shows the problem that's looming on our horizon. And we're already seeing it with the Marine Mammal Act. The Marine Mammal Act requires the 1/4
That's right.
native blood quantum.
Is that just for Southeast Alaskans, or is
No,
that for
it's all of Alaska.
all of Alaska, even
All of
the?
Alaska, right.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
And it's really tragic. I went to a meeting with hunters, marine mammal hunters, and I heard grandfathers say, I can't even take my grandson hunting with me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was at that point in time, that we said we really need to work on this.
Well, we also have the clock ticking on climate change, and it's affecting your part of the country more than a lot of other places. But is Russell Thornton still alive?
I don't know, but he did great work for us, and
Yeah,
I'm hoping that we'll be able to get him back.
But he's an ace, and he's the one of a kind. But I would gather all your math majors and try to figure out how they can become researchers, and maybe you'll get a demographer. But I think you need to do not you, but the tribes across the nation have to do the calculus of population study, not just the arithmetic. It's a very complex issue in terms of the trends, and we're trying to peek around the corner. If we had the answer, it'd be great, but we don't.
Well, it's definitely a complex issue and question, and I'm hopeful that people are going to be reading your book. And tell us the name of your book.
Okay, it's The Great Vanishing Act, Blood Quantum, and the Future of Native Nations. And you can get it on Barnes & Noble or Amazon. You can order it. And, and the first chapter is about Indian women dating. There's voices from the indigenous people in Japan. And we have something about indigenous people in Hawaii as well as in New Zealand. And so it has a wide range of ideas and thoughts in terms of people, in terms of what this all means. So we have lots of good voices in the book, and we hope it motivates others to advance it. We're just trying to kick the door open and let others write, research, think. And I think it's there, but it takes time, and the time is we don't have, because every day an elder dies. And they're not a large population of families anymore. We just can't afford it.
Right. Well, I know this pandemic has been really a challenge and has brought a lot of problems for us. But the one good thing that it has brought for us is that at Sealaska Heritage is we've transferred all of our in-person programming. We've transformed them into virtual programming. And so right now, when we have, we're teaching in art class, We are
Yeah.
having our tribal members who are living in New Mexico, California, and
Sure.
you know, a lot of places, you know, are participating, and they're absolutely loving it. You know, they still have that spiritual connection to us.
There's a connection. That's right. Yeah. So we've become Zoom Indians in a sense. I don't know what that all means, but I think you're right. I think in the end result, it's good. But because we can't break the spiritual umbilical cord that we have with each other because of geography, but we also have to be mindful of what we have at home.
Mm-hmm. And another observation I've made is that sometimes those have been raised outside of Alaska or outside of our homeland. They return home,
Yeah.
and they become, you know, absolutely, you know, the worker bees, working for
That's
our
right.
culture, working for our people, and you know, just bringing great strength, you know, plus the knowledge, you know, that they've come back with. So
We've seen some of that here too, but it used to be when a college graduate comes home, they say, you've been whitewashed, you've been anglicized, and they have to go through a lot of hazing before they're accepted. I think that's changed. And so, you know, and there was also a threat saying, you're coming back after my job, you know, and so we've got to figure out how to welcome people home and make a place for them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, these are great discussions, and I think, you know, that we have to have more of them, and look for solutions, you know.
Yeah.
That I still like that concept of the home rule. I
Yeah.
think we need to look at that, because
Yeah.
I mean, you open up the door, you know, to lineal descendants, and that's wonderful, but it does create those tensions and conflicts between you know, those living at home and those outside.
That's right. That's right. So not easy decisions, but I think we can make them without the approval of the Interior or the BIA. So I hope you're not under their thumb any longer.
And I guess that's what real self-determination and sovereignty is that we can make those decisions.
But the thing is that we don't take time to ruminate. The internet has made the thing go so fast that sometimes we don't give enough time for a thoughtful conversation, you know. So I think we need to figure out how to balance that. I wish more people were doing what you're doing up there with this lecture series, and so, you know, that could be sent around the country and regionalized. But it's a great concept.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and thank you for agreeing to be on it. You know.
Yeah. I didn't dare want to get on an airplane, but I was.
I know.
Yeah, I'd love to come up and visit with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm hopeful, you know, that after, when we can all get together, maybe by the next November Native American series, that we'll be able to have you and all of those others, you know, that I want you guys to come to Alaska to see, you know, our homeland, and to see, you know, how we are similar to tribes in the lower 48, but how we also differ with Native corporations.
Well, it's wonderful you're making those lectures available after the conference to those not only in Alaska, but all over. So I look forward to listening to Walter Echohawk and others.
Oh, yes. And listen to Chris McNeil. I think he did an excellent job of explaining the differences between the lower 48 Indian tribes and Alaska Natives.
He's an attorney, isn't he?
Yes, right.
Yeah, no, I know Chris from years ago, but yeah, I'm looking into that one too. Yeah, great.
Right. He's the foremost, in my opinion, legal theorist on INCSA. And
now, you had a lot of leaders in Alaska graduate from Mount Edgecomb. It's probably the only BIA school I think that worked.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there, but you must have Mount Edgecomb babies too.
Right. It was really wonderful. I always say that the great benefit of Mount Edgecomb is that Alaska Native people from all over the state went to that school. And when we were working on the Alaska Native Land Claims Act, they became the leaders that knew each other, were able to call each other up on the phone at that point in time, and were able, you know, to work out. And we did have a lot of differences between the Arctic and Southeast, for example. But because they had gone to Mount Edgecomb, they were able, you know, to call on each other.
So if you had one smart kid in Nome, there's nobody to talk to. So if he goes to Mount Edgecomb, he can exchange ideas and be able to expand the knowledge of his own groups. But yes, so I salute Alaska for doing that well.
Well, I don't know if Chuck's here, but I guess I should turn it back to him. And I've enjoyed, our visit.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful we're going to be able to do this again, and it's so good to see you. Yeah.
Same here. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you
I'm
for
turning it
inviting
over back to Chuck.
I see you lost your chair.
Yeah, I lost my chair.
Great to see Rosita.
Yeah, that was a great discussion you guys had. We do have a lot of followers, and I just want to mention that I don't know the Facebook term, but these lectures are going, to 3,000 or 4,000 people,
Yes.
register on Facebook that it goes by or whatever it does. But it really does. It's really widespread, and it's great to have you on board and to bring in the lower 48 issues and because they're very similar in Alaska.
Well, it's a great model that you guys are doing. So I'm glad that it's going to be expanded to other places and other people to see what you're doing. So anyway, you're not up in the boonies freezing to death. You're doing something.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hill. SHI invites viewers to return for our next lecture by Michael E. Roberts, entitled Native Americans, Alaska Natives, Racial Crises and Racial Equity and the Case for Reclaiming a Native Narrative. That'll be broadcast on Tuesday, November 24th at noon. We have a link below the YouTube video for a survey we hope you will take a moment to complete. This will help us to continue improving our lecture series and allow our funders to measure the impact of the program. SHI has started construction of its arts campus in downtown Juneau, which will expand opportunities for education and art. If you are interested in making a donation to the arts campus or submitting a letter of support to the Juneau Assembly for city funding, please visit sealaskaheritage.org/campus. Thank you and see you again on Tuesday.
That's a wrap.